Welcome to Elevating Consciousness, the podcast that helps you discover deeper levels of truth, meaning, and wholeness. I'm your host, Artem, and our guest today is a transformational coach and facilitator. He's also a co-founder of Circling Europe, an organization that has helped spread the practice of circling to over 25 countries. Prior to being a circling leader, he was an elite tennis coach focusing on the psychology of performance. For the last 15 years, he's been deeply entrenched in relational practices, meditation, coaching, wisdom traditions, as well as therapy and trauma work. Some of his latest offerings focus on navigating the darker dimensions of developmental trauma, as well as exploring nonduality in the context of circling. Sean Wilkinson, welcome to the show.
Yo, good to be here.
Yeah, it's good to see you again. And I just want to set a little context before we dive in. So I got a chance to participate in Circling Europe's SAS Circling Facilitator training. It was a 6-month training, but it ended in this past October. And this was probably one of my favorite personal growth trainings that I have ever done. And I actually think that you facilitated the most sessions on this training, or at least it seemed that way. And I certainly remember the presence with which you held and guided the sessions, and it had a positive impact on me. We also had a chance to do a recorded call afterwards, which I really enjoyed. And I wanted to continue the dialogue and maybe get a chance to learn more about your journey with circling and what you're currently teaching on navigating darker dimensions of developmental trauma and complex relational dynamics. So, before we dive into the deep, dark depths, maybe you can share how you got into circling and what was it about the practice that really pulled you in and made you dedicate the last 15 years of your life to it.
Yeah. Well, it was actually a love at first sight experience. And as soon as I saw someone circling, I was like, what is he doing? Like, I knew something was happening. I knew it had that presence, that meditative awareness, but it didn't seem like there was any effort or trying to be present. It just seemed natural. But the flavor of the conversation was rich and deep, almost like therapy, but it didn't feel like therapy can. It's like, it felt like it was smooth and fun but meaningful and deep. So I was just like, I need to know what that is. and I remember that when it started to click, I was actually in San Francisco on a trip with my best friend and now co-creator of Circling Europe. And it just started to click. And it was like, we were in coffee shops. And I remember the first time we were in a coffee shop, just in public. And we just started to catch each other's eye. And we just started to just relax into a presence. So suddenly we knew how to do that, because at first we didn't know really how to do it. And then suddenly I was like there in a coffee shop, and the background was like, there was a tree behind my friend. And it just started to, like, maybe a bit like that painting in your room, just started to like become psychedelic. But I became very relaxed and so it felt like, almost like a drug experience. But there we were just having coffee together. And I was just like, what the? And suddenly it was like, and then I was like, what's happening for you? And then he described something similar. So we were just like, oh my God, have we just discovered like this secret, like, gateway to presence and the mystery? And then it just started happening more and more. And so we were just like, we kind of at the same time just said, we're going to devote our lives to this, or at least we're going to devote a lot of time to cultivating this kind of presence. And then that was the beginning.
Yeah, I'm just wondering. I'm like, what was in the coffee? What did they put in the coffee?
Yeah.
It's interesting because I had John on here on this podcast a couple of months back, and he was also talking about this experience, how I think he also mentioned that it was San Francisco. That's where you first came across this practice. And now I'm like hearing it kind of more through your lens and through your eyes. I'm also curious, how has your understanding of circling transformed from when you initially started to now? Like, how do you see circling differently now after doing it for 15 years? Has anything changed? Has anything remained the same? What is your relationship like with it? And what is your understanding of it? It's
changed so much, actually, but it feels like what circling's always felt like to me. It's like this, you often hear this in kind of self-development books, that it's like an inside-out experience. But it really has been that. It's like the more we circle, the more the practice evolves, and the more we lead different people and different paradigms in the world. It's like the practice has to evolve, or we have to evolve as leaders leading the practice. But one of the main things in the beginning, it was really about, it was deep connection, but it was also like I was so yearning for transformation. I was so into like integral theory and, reading about mysticism. I'd done the whole India trip and been there for a year, like soaking up all that spirituality. But there was still such a deep longing for me to really know the mystical worlds. But there was also actually, don't think I could have admitted it to myself so clearly at that age, like 15 years ago, but there was also such a deep yearning for like feeling less broken, or just struggling with like subtly with my experience, or finding my challenges in life difficult. And so there was like, I really came to it like looking for answers, and it was the best thing I'd ever experienced, for meeting all those, like I described, just in a coffee shop without, I wasn't in silence for 10 days doing 10 hours of meditation a day. We were just, drinking coffee and there in the sun, and suddenly this mystical experience was coming in. And I felt every time I circled, it was like that. And then at the same time, like when we committed to circling, which is very simply just becoming present in a meditation-like way, but then being in relationship, but being in a real relationship. So often you do spiritual practice and you'll be like present, but it won't feel like you're also being kind of normal, or showing up with someone, or having a normal conversation. You'll feel like you're doing a kind of practice that's a bit abstract, or you're going to a retreat center, and or you're doing a certain kind of practice. Whereas circling is much like, can we capture ourselves in presence in a normal, like really showing up with each other as we are, and even like an encouragement to be even more what we are really, as we get more in touch with ourselves. And that combination just seems like it's like a dynamite or something. It's like you're bringing two elements together, like presence and the realness. And then suddenly it's like you're becoming more present and you're becoming more real at the same time. And they kind of co-create each other. So diving into this experience, it was just like, yes, but then all this longing and need and unconsciousness, so like I was also getting like churned up. And that's what we were really up for. Like we really committed to like seeing each layer as it came, being with that vulnerability. But it wasn't easy. Like you don't even really realize how you resist being present and being in connection. And it's like slowly, the more you practice, the more you see that you're actually resisting, and you're blaming, and you're withdrawing, and in all these subtle ways. And I think what's changed, like especially the last 5 years, is we've got really a lot more experience, and a lot more. We've learned a lot more around what those subtleties are, and the ways that like we can have this intention to be present and real, but if we're actually like stuck in a very subtle pattern or this, like you mentioned, the developmental trauma, if something's kicking in that is actually slightly unconscious to you, you think you're being real and present, but you're actually in a subtle like pattern that is like causing yourself actually more pain and maybe others. Or so I think what's evolved is we're not just exploring this kind of unknown territory. We've actually feel like we've kind of brought back some important learnings that in the early days we weren't understanding as well.
Yeah, so like one of the things that you said that stood out to me was this sense of having this sense of brokenness, right? That I think many people could relate to. And somehow that was also like the practice was a gateway almost into that, to feel that, to be with that. And I'm just curious how, if circle, I imagine that circling has been healing. Maybe you could speak about how it was healing and how it kind of showed you some of these patterns, some of this brokenness. Like what has your experience been working through that with this modality?
Yeah, well, one thing I'd say is that it's been very healing, and it's kind of where I'd see circling now in Circling Europe is some of that longing and drive, that a lot of that, there was a lot of unconsciousness to it. There were a lot of deep fears and a lot of deep patterns that were happening in that enthusiasm and drive. Like I used to be circling all the time, like let's circle even when we're on the bus, let's circle till midnight after the workshop. And it was exciting, but there was actually hidden in those that enthusiasm, deeper unconsciousness or unknown parts of myself. And in integrating those or discovering those, which circling has definitely been the most potent force for me, is when you're especially if you're in a group of people all being present, everyone has their own special kind of way of being present and in connection, and it will shine light on where you're a little unconscious or a lot unconscious. And what I found is in integrating more of that, there's less of a seeking and more of a like grounding into presence and into connection. Like there's not such a kind of unwieldy, exciting, wild journey with the practice. It's more like there's a maturity coming on, a less seeking and a more being come through. But we're also in that uncovering more intricate, deeper, more intimate parts of ourselves. And I can say more. I'd like to hear how that resonates, but I could share more what that looks like personally, but I'd just like to see how that lands first.
Yeah. I guess I'm wanting more of your kind of felt, like what that looked like, how you seen maybe actual things shifting in your daily relationships or your daily life, or maybe there was like a certain pattern or a certain trauma, if you care to share about it, that you actually noticed in the through the practice, and then was able to somehow resolve it, or that helped to resolving it. Yeah.
Well, I think what I'm noticing in me now, like circling myself, being with you, is I'm like, oh yeah, I can remember back a lot of interesting, like developmental steps I went through, and I'm sure I could pick one out. But I'm also like, oh yeah, if I remember the story, I'm not sure that would be so alive as like maybe showing something that I've been currently discovering. Maybe I'll start with that, and then maybe then we can talk about some of my earlier. Because there's something I've been experiencing now, which is, even though I've been doing this for so long, and I think I've had so many insights and shifts, but every time there's a new one, it still surprises me, and I'm still like, whoa, like, wow, that's been there all along. How did I not know? Or there's just a sense of a new world opening up. And what's been happening in me recently, almost everyone I'm circling with, be it a client or my friend or my partner, it's like I get this. I know. Oh yeah, now I talk about it, I get it a little bit with you now. It's like I start to get this tension or build up of like sensation in my solar plexus. And I start to notice I get a little uncomfortable feeling that. Like, and then subtly, if I'm really tuned in, I see that the way I'm being with it is like, I think I'm being with it, but the way I'm being with it is I'm actually hoping it will transform and change because it's uncomfortable. So actually, in a way, that's part of the discomfort. I'm actually very challenged by this feeling on a subtle level. But what I've been discovering being with this sensation is it seems just so physical and so dense. But actually it is a kind of like anxiety almost, or like if I'm really like sensitive to it. And that itself was quite a surprise that I could shift. And it was, I don't know if anxiety is the right word, but it's like there's a subtle emotion that feels a bit fear-like. But then as I tuned into that fear, I was like, oh, yeah, what's that about? And then suddenly I got this sense of this energy. It's actually an energy that wants to come up. And that really surprised me. So I was like, and this was just happening, exploring and, being present with someone else, being there with me and sharing with me what they were sensing in me. When I got this sense of this energy wanting to come up, I got a sense of like, oh, this is actually, I'm holding this energy in. So previously it was just a kind of intense sensation, dense sensation when I tuned into it. But then suddenly it was like an energy wanting to come up, an emotion wanting to come up. And then I'd get hits of anger. And it was like, but not like, wanting to shout. It was like fizzy energy, life force coming into my hands. But then as soon as I'd like, oh, I want to feel that, that feels like power, then I'd feel the clamp again. And then what I would feel is like there's something in my body on a subtle level that's almost there all the time. It's clamping on life force on a subtle level, but it's only if I'm very tuned in, and usually in a connection, because that height amplifies the presence. I start to see that it's actually a very subtle level of tension that's almost all over my body. And as that starts to, and it seems to be in relation to a deep kind of visceral, alive kind of life force that feels like anger. It's like almost like in support of myself. And so, yeah, so I've been playing with this and seeing like on this subtle level, there's almost like this like battle going on between this part of me that feels like it has to hold that in, or something's dangerous and it's trying to keep safe. And this other part that's wanting to emerge, it's very live and powerful. And it reminds me almost archetypally of like, Cain and Abel or something happening in my, visceral experience, like going on inside of me. So yeah, this is a kind of something we might explore in circling. And I'm sure if you're new to the practice, it might not be like what I'm describing, but this is what I'm currently exploring.
Yeah, I'm curious what you make of that. And also, is this been like an experience that you've been having, or is this something that other circlers that you've been circling with, they also are starting to feel this kind of subtle current where it's a sense of something wanting to come up and it kind of manifesting as an anxiety and a fear. And then at the same time, there's like this, it's like an energetic potential that like wants to manifest. And there's like this tension between holding it and letting it come up, like almost like something wants to be expressed, but then there's a fear like, oh, if this is expressed, it might hurt somebody, or it almost seems like a very common thing that we would feel when we start circling, where it's like having the fear of being fully yourself, or like showing up, like bringing all parts of yourself. And like there might be some parts that are okay to bring, that we're used to bringing, and then there's those parts, like maybe the darker parts, or certain emotions like sadness, that we don't like bringing into connection. So in some way, there's this kind of similarity that I think it's like very almost like a lot of beginners will run into that fairly early, but there also seems like you're talking about something that's like more subtle.
Yeah, yeah. This is more subtle, and I've explored a lot with people where something similar is happening, but it's always so unique with each person, and that's what I like as well. Like there's not this like map of what normally happens in circling. We're much more like going from just what we're sensing more intuitively. But of course, when we've got experience and useful maps, they're useful. But what's that famous the Tao Te Ching, like the as soon as you name the thing, it's not the thing anymore. Like,
yeah, I was thinking the map is not the territory. It's like a similar thing. Yeah.
So circling is a good way to keep it being poked into the limits of the map. But actually, what I find with circling is where you are in your journey. I think the next kind of awakening will kind of beckon or will come forth. So when I started, I was just like really struggling with sadness. And I remember like at first I had a lot of aliveness and like presence, and like I had a lot of spiritual experiences. So I was like, I'm in, let's go. And then when I really committed, then I got my first like challenge of like what started to come up is sadness started to come up. And at first I was resisting it without realizing. I was just kind of struggling with it. But then I've done my research, and I know that integrating emotions is important, and I also feel it, like that it's important to welcome my sadness. But then what started happening was sadness would well up in me, but I wouldn't be able to cry. Sometimes I'd get a sense of it, but I was getting this welling of sadness, and then suddenly it was welling. I was like teaching tennis at the time, and I was like working with like an 8-year-old, and sadness was like welling up in me. And I couldn't, I had no control over it. And I thought I was going to cry sometimes. Even one time, this boy, he was very sensitive, he said, "Are you going to cry?" And I was like unbelievable that he saw that, because everyone else, like no one said anything or even seemed to notice, but I was getting this sadness all the time. And then I remember there was this really big circle I had, and suddenly, like what happened is I froze in my hands. I could even feel it like this, which is actually connected to the thing I just shared previously about the battle between the life force and the tensing. But there was this tensing happening, but for the first time, I didn't hide it. So if I felt sadness and some kind of tension in my body, I try and look normal without realizing it. Like I didn't want to look like all tense, and so it was really vulnerable for me to be in front of a group who were circling me and actually allow myself to tense up the real tension in me. And when that was allowed, the way people were being with me, it just really touched me. I started crying, but it was really strange for me because the thought of crying in front of people, I mean, I'm a British guy. It's like emotions were really uncomfortable for me, even though I wanted it and it felt like I needed some kind of catharsis or allowing of my emotion. But because of the way people were being with me, I just started crying and I felt at ease with it. I wasn't even like covering my face. It was really strange. And even after that, I don't even now, I wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable crying if it suddenly came, especially if I was public. But in that, when we were connecting in this way, it felt like, oh yeah, this is actually connecting to feel my emotions with people.
Yeah. What you're saying resonates right now because I feel it's like relevant in my own life with like dealing with sadness. And for me, actually, I've been somebody who cried like my whole life, you know, like tears would just, and I couldn't hold them back. They would come up literally. Like, I think I was maybe like 16 and I was like crying about something. And my dad was like, oh, like you're 16. Like, what, why are you crying or something? Why are you still crying? And like now I kind of realized that maybe like sadness wasn't something that was like really accepted. Like in my family, like anger was accepted, but sadness wasn't. And I would feel deep sadness at certain times and also anger, but like sadness was not the one that wasn't accepted. So it's like the way that it would felt, it was like it would come up and then part of me would be suppressing it. So I'd be crying. It would almost feel like getting your foot stuck in the door. It's like, oh, I'm like so sad, but the emotion wouldn't move through me, right? It would get like almost like stuck. And then I'd be crying, but it wouldn't, like I wouldn't be crying at all. It'd be like halfway crying or like holding the tears back or something like that. And you know, it's still something that I'm working with now, but yeah, like going back to your story of like playing tennis and then like the sadness coming up. And I noticed this with myself, like I'll be somewhere in public and I'll just have a wave and it's like, oh, I can't cry right now because I'm like over here in this public area. And then later it's like I'll be alone and it's like, oh, it went away. It's like, where did it go? But I know it's not processed. Like I know I need to go through feeling that. And I kind of have this vision, and I don't know, like this is just something I keep sharing, and I don't know how this would work, but it's like imagine you were just walking down the street and somebody is like just crying, and it's like, oh yeah, look, it's a person processing their emotions, and it's like completely normal. Whereas if somebody was crying now, like a grown man was just crying, you're like, well, what the hell happened to him? So it's like that, like I envision that, like us being able to cry when we need to. Yeah, and I don't know. I don't know. I guess there's like when I share that, there's like a lot of resistance to like, oh, like cry. Like you have to compartmentalize your emotions and your crying. Like you need to cry at a specific time in a specific place. And like, yeah, I don't know. Like just with me, it always felt like the emotions are coming up. Like I need to cry right now. I need to cry. It's like, you know, it's almost like if you need to use the bathroom, like, yeah, you know, you might hold it till you find a place to go. But it's like, if you really got to go, like you got to go use the bathroom. Maybe they could have like booths for crying or something. I don't know. What do you make of what I'm saying right now?
Yeah, a lot of things. I enjoy the vision and the where I imagine you're coming from in it. Like this seems like a sense of really honoring like the whole human experience and noticing like the pain it can be to try to suppress that sometimes, or and even that example you gave with your father, even if it sometimes it's like, you know, parents in actually in a very good willing place, but then they just say, like you're 16, why are you feeling sadness? But actually there's a little bit of unacceptance in there. So then of course that's not, you're not going to suddenly then want to really cry with him and feel like you can really show what it is that you're emotionally feeling, and then feel him be really close, like be touched in his emotion with you. So you get to share that and then discover like almost the transmission of sadness. Because the thing that you discover when you do start to be able to feel the sadness, and especially in connection, is there's a special transmission from all these emotions. And the one I always got from sadness was like, yeah, I get shivers remembering it. It's like, you know, that sense sometimes where you're around people that you love and you know, but you're so familiar with them that there's a kind of subtle when you think about it, where's the subtle awkwardness or something, or like it's something kind of flattens out a little bit, and it can even, you can get to the stage where you're, you know, things aren't quite as open as normal. You're just used to each other, but then something happens, like, you know, your uncle or your sister or your mum, or they get sick or something, or they have a close shave, or like, or an accident of some kind, or they get fired, and then suddenly you're like, oh, like, and it hits you so deep, and it's like, how do I forget how much I love them? Like, how does that happen? It kind of covers over. Well, what I found is when I started to connect with my sadness more, like, consciously, and be able to bring it in connection, it cut through complacency to the real love I have with the people close to me. So I felt like, oh, what a gift. Like, I practice and I get to experience more of myself. And then in my life, I'm like, I'm not being complacent with those I love, and I'm feeling a lot of meaning just being around them. So it's like, that's the gift of the sadness. So what a loss. And I think that's part of your vision. Like, what a loss if the sadness gets held in, when it can be showing us like the real love we have for the people that are close to us. And then at the same time, like, there is also something about the way we try to, you know, manage our emotions. There's also a wisdom in that as well. Like, there's a way that people can also act out their emotions. They're actually using their emotions to try and make something happen, or to get something, or they've learned that. And on a deeper level, that's innocent. But there is something to this convention of, like, you know, trying to be with your emotions. I remember recently I had a little crash on my bike, and it wasn't that serious, but I had my daughter on the bike, and she's 2 years old, and she almost banged her head, and she was terrified. But we were okay. But that is actually a huge thing, actually, even though in a way it wasn't that serious. In another way, it had a huge impact on me. But then I was going to someone's birthday party, and that's, your vision then would have been lovely. Like, when I got there, I could just cry in front of everyone. But this was like a busy restaurant, and it was someone's birthday. So I just was like, oh, by the way, I've got a cut on my leg. I'm just going to go to the bathroom. So I went to the bathroom because I needed to cry, or I wanted to cry, actually, is the better. And so I went, and I knew I was in a trauma response. I knew I needed to process. Like, that was my daughter. Like, that was a close shave. She almost hurt herself. So I was just like crying, and I was also tuning into my body, and it was wanting to like push away, and it was wanting to get angry. So I just gave myself time in the toilets doing that, which was even a bit awkward, even like locked up in the toilets, but it allowed me to free that energy. And then when I went to the party, it was like I could, yeah. Whereas before, I was almost welling up, even like being there with everyone.
Yeah, it brings me joy to hear that you have a young daughter. I also have 2 young kids.
Oh, wow.
It's interesting because I remember going, when I first started the circling practice, I learned at Monastic Academy. That's where I was introduced. And I just remember being there like the only one with kids. And I'm like, oh, I'm like the only person that's here that it's like, obviously, like, who, like, what parents have time to go to a monastery? Like, I was even blessed that I was able to go there for 10 days. But it's nice to hear when other people in doing this work and this practice have kids, because I feel like like this practice is just, it makes us more embodied, awakened, present, responsive, emotionally mature. And it's like, it's beautiful to see, to be able to transmit that and hold space for the kids in that way. And I guess the other thing that's coming up with, like, what you're talking about was this kind of, it's a thread that I've been sitting with, this, there's kind of a pattern where we can suppress emotions, right? And some people are like really good at suppressing, and they'll never talk about anything. And it's like, oh, everything's always fine, everything's okay. And I think there's an opposite pattern. And I think this kind of speaks to what you were saying about like acting out the emotion or trying to get something through the emotion. and for me, like that, I was more that, like I was more expressive always, like explosive and expressive, and like being more deeper into meditation and some of the Buddhist teachings. Like one of the concepts they talk about is reification. And, you know, you could reify experience, you could reify thoughts, you could reify emotions, which is kind of amplifying them and making them bigger and more solid and real than they really are. And I've recognized that I've been doing that. And you know, and I kind of see this pattern of like some people are more into kind of the reifying and some people are more into the suppressing. And it seems to me like the healthy way is kind of the middle. That's like the middle way. And I'm just curious if that, like, you see those also kind of ways of dealing with emotions, and what you see like this more healthier way. Like maybe it's what you said about going to the bathroom and like actually allowing yourself to feel this, but doing it like in an embodied way where, you know, it doesn't like hurt other little kids around there that may not know how to deal with that or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is where I think you're tapping into, like, imagine, I think it's a paradox. We've got to be careful of calling things paradoxes, though. On the deeper level, often they're not. But it's, I think there's like the wisdom of the wisdom traditions like Zen and Buddhism, and you find it in all the traditions. That, yeah, there is a way we rarefy our experience, or we may actually on closer look is not solid, or like that what I said earlier, like you can never encapsulate reality in your understanding. It's always too complex, or the wholeness is always bigger than what you can understand. And so there is a way we can use emotions and our thoughts, but especially emotions, to kind of make an identity for ourselves, or try to control what's happening. And it's also what I see as the danger of like the like use like, and I think this was true in my early circling, is like I was really desperate to get in touch with emotions and integrate them, because there was like an intuition that's important to include more of myself, and I think that was good. But there was also a part that just didn't want to be. I didn't want to be in the experience I was having, and I was creating my own suffering in that. And so I think there is a danger with circling, and to go too far either way. Like I've definitely seen people who are more on the meditative side, and they're so trying to be in that kind of non-rarefying, non-egoic place that actually it's hard for them to relate to anyone. And they often get poked by people in circles because they're like, huh, where are you? And sometimes they can be really in an authentic space where, why are you asking them where they are? There's no one there. But sometimes it's actually a way they learn to kind of deal with the intensity of especially being in relationship with other human beings, because it's a very complex and intense experience, actually, if you pay attention to it. But on the other side, the emotional experience is the same. Like there is an integration where we can learn to be on that middle ground that you say, where we're allowing what's there to integrate, but we're not trying to make it happen. We're not trying to integrate it in a certain way. So we're not suppressing, but we're not also attaching to it. But then it's easy to either attach or to suppress. And that's where it's, again, like an art, I think, more than a science. Like that's why, again, I just love, authentic connection, because by being with lots of different people, they'll give us little insights where we do subtly attach or suppress, or I think this experience I was having, where I'm like, in one way I'm suppressing the anger, and in another way I'm attaching to it because I want it, because it feels like it's powerful. But then ultimately, if I'm developing my capacity to be with, that's just what's happening. I don't know what's the best way to, for this process to happen, or this is just a movement. Yeah, something like that.
I think this is maybe a good place to talk about these new trainings that you're doing on navigating the darker developmental trauma dynamics. Can you speak on some of these complex dynamics that people may encounter as they go deeper into meditation and relational practices?
Yeah, well, these immersions I was doing that have stood out to you, yeah, because there's other things that I'm doing at the moment that are exciting as well. But this particular thing is, there was a period a few years ago where I really had a deep dark night of the soul. Like I got a bit sick, and quite sick, and it was like everything I was doing seemed to be activating this pain I was experiencing and this unwellness that I was experiencing. It was very linked to fatigue and inflammation, but yeah, real struggle inside of me. And I was seeing like these ways I could like get triggered into the helper role, and how much that would activate like a tiredness in. It was like a pool of mirrors, and it was like such a surprise. I'd been on such a nice flow for a good period, and then suddenly, boom, like the new challenge came on. And in that, actually, I let go of all my practices, and that's when. But what emerged from letting go of everything, just really started meditating. But I started meditating in a new way where I really didn't interfere, didn't try to be aware. I didn't try to process. I didn't try to be in non-duality. I let go of all of that, and I'm just going to sit still and let's like trust that my experience knows what it's doing. And that was really important to me. Like that's such a big, important. Did that for a year, like very intensely, like 5 to 8 hours a day. I was meditating in this way, and it was really nice experience. Challenging, but it was really important healing for me. And then when I integrated the circling into that, it was also like, wow, like the circling is like, this complexity and intimacy and the transformational experience you can have in connection. Can't quite have the same experience in meditation, really. It's like a different paradigm. But I wanted to bring them together. So these immersions I've been doing is bringing these together. And it's such a nice mix because you can go into stillness and what stillness brings. And then you go into the circling and exploring connection and having that transformational experience. Then coming back to meditation and seeing, developing your trust in your own being to integrate and process what's there if there was anything challenging, or and to sink into a deeper inquiry into what your being really is. So I found this a really good cross-pollination. But what I found in this was that actually it was a really good ground for me to bring in, like I did a lot of trainings in developmental trauma. So it's a really good place to integrate that, because although you can discover all the same things in meditation and in circling, the therapeutic world has gone further than anyone in really examining like what is trauma, or what is this way we get stuck in these difficult relational or personal like dilemmas and patterns. Like they've really gone to town with that. And what I noticed in the circling world is we were developing a good intuition around this, and we use therapeutic understandings, but it was like I wanted to go deeper, and what I saw from that is actually a lot of the challenges we were getting into in the practice, especially with certain people that would come in that I think would have more complex, had more complex lives, or and more difficult developmental trauma experiences, it was difficult to navigate that. But then the challenge for me was, I don't want to turn circling into a therapeutic practice where we try to heal emotional pain or difficult. But this wisdom is so important. So I spent quite a few years integrating like the wisdom of like circling, where we're just exploring authentic connection, but can we bring in this deep wisdom of what they've discovered around developmental trauma? And so I'm doing these trainings where we get to play with that. So we're meditating in stillness, we're circling, but then I'm bringing in these frames. One of them is like, I call it the darker dimensions. I'm not sure it was the right name actually, but what I was pointing to is darker in terms of it's usually harder to see, and it's more hidden, more than it's dark like evil. Like it's more like it's darker because you can't see it. And I wonder, it's a good question for you actually. I mean, have you experienced, like maybe currently, but at some point in your life, a relationship with someone where it was just a bit more or a lot more complex than your normal relationships?
Well, certainly feel that. I certainly feel that with my parents. It seems like there's a lot of complex things. Like I can be a lot more embodied and like present, and kind of things are more clear with other people. But I find that the closer I am with a person, that's where the most triggers can come up. Even like I work with my wife. She actually has a psychotherapy practice. And so sometimes there's certain things, that we're processing within the business, but also within ourselves with the leadership team, because we're part of the leadership team. And yeah, it just becomes more challenging because it's like we also share a life together. There's also all this other stuff. Whereas if I'm working with a clinician there or one of the other leaders there, it's like cleaner somehow. Like there's like less, I don't know. It's like even like circling with somebody, like hopping on relateful.com and just like circling with somebody there. It's like, it's something about it is cleaner because it's not like I'm not living with the person. So it's like when I'm living with somebody, and the more I have connections with them, the more I find in my experience that there's more complexity to the relationship.
Well, this gets into another kind of important dimension of connection that I'd like to touch on, because when you're in close relationships, that's a really big thing. And I wonder if you also imagine you've had people in your environments before, like not people you were close to, but just around someone where you're like, wow, like relating with them, there's an added complexity. Like there's that either it's more challenging or you're more volatile, or
There was actually something that happened. I feel like I've kind of let go of it now. It was kind of like a big thing with a friend where, I mean, it was definitely, it was challenging. It seemed like I done or said something that bothered him. And then when I brought it up, when we ended up having a conversation, like it was very clear. There was a lot of evidence that what I did bothered him. But when I brought it up, it was like, oh no, it's like, seems like you have a problem with this. And that was very, I had a story. I was like, oh, this is like some gaslighting or something. Like that's,
right.
I had that story for a couple of days. And then because I've never ran into that kind of behavior in this relationship before, I kind of had to let it go, because it was like, oh, this is not something that's happened many times. It kind of happened once. So I didn't want to hold on to that story. But there was a lot of just not feeling good in my body, and like something here does not land. It feels like I have this reality and maybe I was becoming attached to it, and like I don't actually know what the reality is like now, and that's kind of what the gaslighting is. It's like making somebody question what is real and what really happened. So that was a very that was not too long ago, and that was kind of like it was challenging.
Well, this is a really good example. So in these kind of connections, and it sounds like with your friend, this was like not a common experience with him. But when it gets complex like this, it gets really intense to see what is going on, like why. And it seems the more you try to kind of get out of it, the tighter the knot gets. It's like a Gordian knot. And this training I was developing is I really wanted a space where, using the meditation and circling, we can start to look at these more intricate patterns. And if you can't see them, all your good practice of being present and being authentic, you're going to keep getting stuck. And maybe you can hear my daughter just outside the door. She's letting her presence be known. But yeah, so the what I found doing like a lot of training in developmental trauma, it wasn't like new territory in a way. Like in circling, we navigate that a lot, and like you've already found, and we can navigate it well. But there was just a few distinctions where it was like, you know, when you're suddenly like, oh, that's what was going on. Oh my God. And it's a little bit humbling, like where you see yourself getting triggered. Like one for me was in certain connections, because I'd expanded my range of empathy with circling, I could be with like a lot more challenging things in connection. So I was just like, okay, bring, like, now I've got a commitment to be with what's there. So let's, you know, I opened my door to more complexity. But what I would find is actually when I was challenged, so freeze subtly, and then go into a kind of survival kind of empathy where I'm like attuning to the other, actually to keep myself safe, almost like an animal, like with a bigger animal around, like tries to like be non-offensive or useful to the bigger animal. But interesting, this was happening to me in connections, not where I felt like the person was necessarily bigger, but the complexity of the connections make it like putting me into that kind of survival mode. But I wouldn't fully know it. So there I was using my empathy and being in this difficult situation. And actually the thing I wasn't seeing is that's actually in my relationships that I want to be in, there is actually a high bar on both sides for me and my friends for like checking in with each other if we assume things about each other, if we want to say something more difficult, really checking the other one's ready. Or there's a lot of ways that, you know, we just have learned to be with each other, to have the kind of friendships we have. And actually what I've discovered through, you know, learning about these deep patterns is what can happen in these more complex relationships is we let go of the normal standards we actually need for connection and get stuck in this survival patterns that we don't see. But as soon as you see them, you can see like, oh yeah, I'm allowing someone to judge me in a way that I would never normally allow someone to do with me. And so as soon as you do that, you're going to be stuck in something very painful, actually. You're compromising the truth of what you actually want in a relationship. So that's again another evolution in circling. It's like seeing these like what we really truly value and being able to stand for it in a way that we don't become aggressive with other people or, you know, start, you know, judging them back, but we can hold a standard of what we want for a relationship in a way that's inviting, but also will say no if something's not okay with us. And this can help us navigate these complex situations. I mean, that was a lot of information in a condensed thing, so we can unpack it.
Yeah. Actually, I want to kind of circle back to having the high bar within your inner circle and your relationships, but because there's something that's resonating there with me. But the other thing that I wanted to talk about is, and I seen you mentioned, right, because in the email, because you sent out an email talking about these trainings that you're doing, and I think you mentioned that some of these complex dynamics, one of them was narcissism and the other one was borderline. And, I have some more understanding about narcissism or like NPD, narcissistic personality disorder. And, one of the things of course I learned was there's also such thing as everyday narcissism. And there's actually a great book about this. It's by A.H. Almas, and it's like transforming narcissism and self-realization. I forget the title, but very like intricate, in depth. I mean, he's not an easy guy to read. He's like also like Ken Wilber. I feel like they have great ideas, but it's not like easy to read stuff. But it's very interesting because he talks about everyday narcissism and really kind of transformed my understanding of narcissism from being like this pathology that, a small percentage of people have to like, oh, we're all functioning from these kind of dynamics to a lesser or more degree. And when it falls into like kind of the normal range, then it's like, oh, this is just how, regular people relate. We're all kind of narcissistic in our relating. So maybe you could kind of speak a little bit more to that narcissistic dynamic and also what the borderline dynamic is.
Yeah, well, and this was the other thing I wanted to bring in, because the darker dimensions, in a way, when we hear these psychiatric terms, it can be a bit like, oh no, like, don't like labeling people like that. And I think that's a good insight. But then, psychiatrists and psychologists have been kind of studying human beings for like 100 years or so, and they have discovered things. Like, the way I hold it is like, I use that knowledge, which I've had some training in, to be able to better see the dynamics. So I more see it as a dynamic than a person. And certain times when the tension's there, or there's certain situations, that dynamic can develop. And then, so for me, I would never use those terms in terms of like a psychologist would, because I just don't have that kind of training, and I don't have that kind of perspective as well. But what I saw from learning about these and how to, if I would work with them as a therapist, is it was like giving me so much insight to these challenging things that I was experiencing in connection. And it was so helpful. It was finally like having like night vision and being able to see what was going on in the dark. And it was like, it's so useful. The thing with narcissism is it's actually just, it's like having an ego. It's like just being a person. It's like you've got an image of who you are, and you a little bit get attached to the image and lose sight of that. You don't actually really know who or what you actually are really, and the core of it. And there's a deeper presence there. It's more the truth. But we're human beings, and so we have an identity, and that's formed by these subtle images we have. And so, but when that's really strong, then it gets pretty intense. Like if you're yourself, or you're relating with someone who's got a very, very strong sense of who they are, and especially if they project what you are, that can be really tricky. But the thing that happens is if you react in a certain way to that, well, then you're also in a subtle narcissistic trap there as well. But that's just so innocent. It at the core of it, that's the more we explore this, the more we see, like, as soon as you see there's an innocence to these patterns, that's one of the best ways to transcend and include it. So 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 with narcissism, it's about seeing where you're becoming attached to a kind of self-image and all the kind of feeling and intensity that comes under that, and the needs that come under that. With borderline's quite an intense one. Like borderline's like technically it's about if you've experienced extreme or very difficult neglect or abandonment of what you really need, that's so overwhelming at like a deep level that can't be experienced. And what you learn to do is get very, very good at pleasing the person you're close to or that you want to have a connection with. But you get very good at also finding the weaknesses of the person you want to get close to and being good at attacking those weaknesses, which seems like counterintuitive, but it's actually a very good last effort to keep the connection alive. Because if you can get to that weakness, it can create some kind of attachment because the other person, gets triggered into like, trying to stop, that attack. Or so it's a real like primitive, like last gasp effort to stay in connection. So, I mean, when you see that, it can just open your heart. But at the same time, if you see this dynamic forming, the best antidote is to develop really clear boundaries, which gets to that thing again about staying in the truth of the values you need in connection. But seeing how you can get tied in to, first of all, if yourself or anyone you're kind of connecting with in whatever context has had to deal with this kind of deep sense of abandonment or some kind of deep pain, and they've learned this dynamic in certain situations, what you'll see is they'll start to praise you, but because it's such an intuitive survival kind of pleasing, it will be so accurate. Like they'll find the way that you do get stroked, like, oh yeah, you no one's understood me, like no one's had the insight into me like you have. And if that's your thing, insight, you'll get a bit of a like, woo. But at the same time, when things start getting a bit dicey, and it usually happens slowly, there's also like, they find the perfect weakness. Like, oh yeah, you don't really care about, you don't really care about other people achieving their dreams. You're just interested in yours, or something like that. And if that's something for you where it's really important for you to honor people's potential, but you get hit there, then you're like totally thrown off, and suddenly it can escalate to where suddenly you're getting accused of things that you can't even imagine of yourself, and it's like, how did we get here? But if you're still triggered in it, you'll be trying to like redeem yourself of this like serious attack, or you'll be trying to deal with it. But actually, you've already gone way, 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 way over your boundaries, and so you're so compromised by them that it's only going to get worse. So when you see these patterns and how they can emerge, you've got a chance to deal with it. And I find even if you don't find yourself, dealing with this kind of an extreme dynamic, just knowing the potential of it can be very freeing, or at least preparing for that potential. Yeah. I wonder how it lands hearing it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm very much fascinated all this stuff. And I guess the other thing that comes up is like, it could kind of be terrifying too. It's like, there's so much subtlety in relating. And like you said, people can get so good at some of these things, and that you wouldn't even know, that that you're caught up in this pattern. Somebody's like praising you, but it's not in a healthy way, right? It's not a healthy praise. And then the other thing that comes up is I'm wondering if like a lot of these things are kind of unconscious, because it's like, I think sometimes people think that, narcissism or these kind of dynamics are kind of very like the person's trying to manipulate me. And it seems that, like, as I've been learning about, like, for example, gaslighting, it seems like a lot of this stuff is actually unconscious. It's almost like a defense mechanism. And the other person is not like sitting there consciously trying to do that. It's just running. It's a pattern that's running on its own.
Yeah. And if you start to see, like, having like explored this with people, and like when you start to see what kind of created that for them and what's happening on a deeper level in them, it's so touching. And it's like, and you can't believe like what they may have experienced. And it's like, yeah, your heart goes out to it. So it's pure surviving. And the tragedy of it is it's surviving something that's actually already happened. It's not actually happening. And at the same time, this is the danger though, or this is when we develop this seeing and this empathy, this is the important thing though, that we also develop the capacity to stand in our truth and to say no to things that go over the line of what's acceptable for us. But then we need the skill to do that in a way that doesn't just also become aggressive or withdrawing. It is intricate. And this training is a more like advanced training. So it's, for anyone who's like new to circling, be like, whoa, what are we doing? It's like, no, this is usually for experienced leaders who work with a lot of people. But I also just get people that come on this who are quite new, and they're just like, they just love the human experience. So they're like, this sounds deep and meaningful. So they want to explore it. And actually what I've seen learning about this is most people have a pretty good natural sense of the boundaries with these kind of dynamics. So they don't get in them very much, but they might also see that they also stay way clear of it, like, and in a way, avoid it. So I'm definitely not recommending you learn about this and then try and like connect with people that you would normally stay clear of. But it's good to have more choice and more empathy of what's happening and more choice around what to do. And actually the thing that was encouraging for me with looking at learning about these things is actually, as serious as they look, people who are in like more present-based connections actually start to heal quite deeply from these kind of dynamics. So there's one thing, we've got to develop good boundaries, but it's also, I think, we want to develop a bigger range for what we can connect with. I think it's also important to learn about it and practice around it.
Yeah, like what's coming up right now is, I really also, as I've been learning about mental health, really don't like diagnosing people. And, working in the psychotherapy practice, I see how you kind of have to diagnose because that's how it works with insurance. So it's a problem there in the whole system, and hopefully it's one that we can change moving forward. But I have found that when a pathology gets to a certain level, and that's, with like narcissistic personality disorder, there's certain parameters you need to have, the same as like major depression. Like there's certain parameters. If you're, they have a scale, and if you're hitting that scale, they're like, yeah, like you're diagnosed with major depressive disorder. Or if you hit certain parameters on narcissistic personality disorder, it's like, yes, this is kind of, I like to look at things more as patterns and behaviors. But when the pattern becomes like so pervasive and so consistent in how it's almost like you become the pattern in a way. And it's interesting because there was several people that I knew that I would relate with, that I was friends with, and that something was always weird. Like, I'm like, what was this? And it took me a long time to kind of unwrap, like there'd be like a lot of lying and just a lot of stuff that was just weird. And I was like, what's happening here? You know, and I was very interested in psychology and the mind. So I'm like, let me try to understand this. And at some point, I actually came to understand what like narcissistic personality disorder was. And I was able to like realize like, wow, this person, like, I really think this person has this pattern, right? Like, cause I would just see it. And, you know, and then just kind of like the way we treat people that, you know, that are narcissists, like, oh, screw the narcissist, like he's an asshole, you got to stay away from him. And, you know, there's a lot of stuff on YouTube and about that, like how to deal with narcissists and approach it. And, you know, over the years, I have gained so much compassion for this person and really anybody that has this kind of pattern, this narcissistic pattern in their relationships. I've gained a lot more compassion because I realized like that pattern manifested out of a trauma, and it's very complex and difficult to heal. And it's not like the everyday narcissism that we all fall into, but it's much more pervasive and much deeper. And I think that one of the things is like you said, I think you said that most people have a good antenna, like will catch on. And I think that actually, if we're not trained and we don't know it, we'll know something is up, but we won't know what it is. And we can stay in that relationship for a long time. So like with this one particular person, I'll see him get close with certain people for like a couple of years. And then they'll eventually figure out, oh, some shit is up, and they'll leave. And then new people come in. And it's like for 2 years, they'll be like best friends with this person and they'll leave. And at one point, that was me years back where I was close to this person. And it took me a long time to really figure out like, whoa. And that's where you put up the boundaries, you know, and you have to have those healthy boundaries. But yeah, but then there's that piece of like having that empathy and like understanding, like even when I see this person, because I sometimes run into them and it's just, it's challenging. It's like very challenging, but that's where I'm really challenged to love, to really open my heart and like see the inner child and see like, oh, this is just a person just like me. And it's like, if I had those experiences, I could have been stuck in this kind of pervasive pattern, this kind of way of relating too.
Definitely. I like what you say there. Like we really, I mean, if you really learn about someone's life, you see in this pattern, sometimes it's possible. It's so shocking. But then the thing also though, that one place people get trapped in, like the empathy, like how much do I, is in terms of love. I think there's like there's a, maybe a polarity again, but there's kind of like classically what you see as love, which is like empathy and like being able to listen and see and give space. But equally, what's love for me is being able to say no in a way that's clear, or to not to set the right standard of like what should be or what you need in connection. And there's something that's often, even when I say it now, like we don't often think of like artful connection as setting a standard or like having, but actually I think it's just actually naturally happening. That's why we get upset with our partner if they suddenly lash out on us or they're not sharing what's really going on for them. That's our standard coming up. But actually, for someone who's really in one of these difficult patterns, if you set boundaries with them, it's actually more powerful sometimes than empathy. Like if everyone around them was just very good at setting boundaries, that would be more healing, I imagine, than any kind of like getting kind of trapped into listening to something that doesn't really resonate for you, or yeah, and losing your kind of truer autonomy. I mean, that's a big part of circling, this idea of trusting your experience, tuning into that subtle sense in us of where we really want to be. And if you find yourself in a certain relationship continually like staying longer than you want to, going to that event that you didn't really want to go to, or taking that call that you were a little bit like, oh, I don't really want to take this right now. But every time you do that, there's actually a deep cost for you and the connection. And so, and you never actually help the connection that way as well. So I think this is really powerful in connection, to own both sides. Like, and yeah, your empathy isn't really real if you can't also say no to the same level. But at the same time, your no is not powerful if it's only coming from a defense, and you can't really empathize with those that you're saying no with too. Yeah, these are things that we get to practice in real time in circling, which is a lot different to theory.
Yeah, I think this is an important point that you're bringing up about love. And it's like, it's embracing the other, but it's also embracing yourself. And it's honoring the other, it's also honoring yourself, and knowing where to set that boundary, and knowing that you can set that boundary and you can make that choice of who you want to be around. And it's like, you could, like, I have this thing where it's like, I try to love everybody because to me, on the deepest level, love is like that. It doesn't discriminate. It doesn't discern. It just loves. But there is this discerning aspect of, like, I like being around certain energies. I like being around certain people, and kind of, I'm moving through space and time where I can't hang out with everybody and be with everybody. Right. So I kind of discern and make a choice of who I want to be around more, who I want to be around less, and where I have to set those boundaries. But I try as much as I can to love everybody. And that, to me, is not in conflict. Like, those two things are not in conflict.
Well, when I look at this, like, more closely, like, if you think, like, love seems to be our word pointing to this way that we want to come together. And it's like, you want to hold or be close. And so when we think of that, we're like, oh yeah, love is this, like, it's this closeness. But actually, if you think of it, like, if the universe has this capacity to it wants to attract things together, like, well, why are we not also then getting attracted to a lamppost or a dog or, like, a tree, or, like, in the same way as we do a human being? So there's actually a force in love. Not only is it bringing us together, but why there are some people we even, like, want to get away from. But that's actually love, I think, telling us, like, it's got this inner wisdom, or it's like bringing things together, but it's probably telling us more what to get away from than it is telling us what to get close to. And it's fierce about that, like, absolutely fierce. You'll feel it in your body. It will tell you to get totally away from some things, and yet so much attraction to other beings. And so love is scarily fierce, and, like, and most people in your life, you'll never get any attraction to. You walk past thousands of people every year that you have no instinct to get closer to, not in a deep way. But yeah, I think embracing the truth of love is very important.
Yeah, that's a very, like, deep and nuanced understanding of love. And it almost seems like love is infinite. Like, there's an infinite depth to it, and you could always understand it on a deeper level. And I like this aspect that you're bringing out. The other thing that I guess maybe we could start wrapping up, but this is kind of the other question that I wanted to ask you about, your own circle of relating, like the people that are around you, the people that are close to you in your life. And the way that I want to set a little context of this, like, you've been doing circling for 15 years, for a long time. I've been doing it for almost 2 years, coming up on 2 years. And it's been a practice that's really transformed my life and my relationships. And one of the things, though, that I notice is since like when I came across circling, it was like, oh yeah, like this is what I've been missing in my life. Like, yes, this is what I wanted for years. I felt like, oh, I want more deeper, more meaningful connections. And now finally learning this practice and becoming better at it and trying to integrate it more in my life, you know, I find that not everybody wants to do it. Not everybody really wants to circle. And like I can hop on relateful.com and it's like everybody's down. You know, like everybody comes there and like we're all doing the practice. Everybody wants to kind of go deeper into connection. But in my real life, like, you know, I'll throw it around. We've been kind of integrating this practice with the psychotherapy practice. But there's like some there's resistance to it, and I noticed there's this kind of resistance that I see in my real life. And for me, it's like, as much as I love doing the practice with people on Relateful or other people that I've met through SAS, we still sometimes meet up and circle, and like I love that. But to me, I see the real power of the practice is in my daily life. It's like the same thing as meditation. Like meditation is great on the cushion, but the true power is how that integrates into your life, how you can take it off the cushion. So it's like, for me, it's like I want to bring circling more into my relating with other people. And, you know, I recognize a lot of that is on my own end. Like as I become better, I can just embody that way of relating with the other person. But there is still something that wants to actually do the practice, the actual like more formal practice with people and really connect with them on that level. So yeah, I was just wondering like if you have any insight of like how to work with that resistance, overcome that resistance, and also like have you in your own life, because you said that you have this very high standard of the way that you relate with people that are close to you. And maybe not all of them, you know, do circling. And it's not so much about circling, right? It's more about the skills. It's more about like what circling teaches you. And if you could learn the skills that circling teaches you another way, no problem. But it's this kind of more healthy way of, and like deeper way of relating in my experience. So like, how does over these 15 years, have you felt that like people that don't want to relate in this way and don't want to learn these skills and be more embodied in the connection, you kind of grew apart from them because there was things that you kind of wanted in the connection that they didn't want? Because that's kind of what I'm with now. I'm like wondering, because there's some people that, you know, they're more about it, and the other people are just like, oh, I don't know, I kind of like relating in this more let me bring more masks. Like I'm not really comfortable peeling these masks. So that's kind of what's been coming up, and I just feel like you've probably come across this way more, you know, at this point. So I'm just curious how that's been for you, or how you've dealt with that.
Yeah, I really like this inquiry, and to actually bring it. And the thing I would say is that whole experience of like, you're in a practice, in a paradigm of deep connection, transformational connection, let's call it. And then there's this journey, you could say, in the real world, like, you know, outside the practice. And then the way I like to look at that is that journey outside the practice in the real world is actually a journey, and it will probably go through stages. And so I've been through stages where I'm like frustrated and infuriated, been through stages where I'm vulnerable, and like in the early days, it was more vulnerable. It's like, oh, I can't embody these principles and these understandings and this aliveness. Can't bring that to the people close to me, especially my lover. And it's so humbling, and I kind of mess it up, and I realize afterwards that, oh yeah, I wasn't owning my experience. I was projecting, and it's painful. But then I start to get more mastery, and then suddenly I'm like, well, I want people to be able to meet me in this way, and I've been through that stage. But I had some really important shifts where, like, one time it was really important to me was I was at home at Christmas around my family, and I started to get that frustration, and it had relaxed because, yeah, once my practice had really deepened with my friends and the people close to me, it's like the need for it to be everywhere just was relaxing. But I did notice one Christmas I started to get that feeling again after a few days. It's like, this is not very nourishing being here. And like, but when I tuned in, I woke up to that and I'm like, okay, so what's really happening? And when I tuned into myself, I realized that I was actually feeling vulnerable being around my family. And I was actually scared of being vulnerable with my family. And what I was subtly doing was like projecting that, they're not comfortable with vulnerability, or they're not, they can't go there. So when I saw I was scared and took more ownership, it actually gave me an interesting new freedom. So I actually became like more compassionate for myself, but also for my family. But I also actually trusted by fear. I was like, oh yeah, this actually isn't an environment where I feel like I can just cry or just share like something really difficult for me. I can quite well. My family's nice to be around, but it's not the same as being around, my peers or my, in a circling space. And suddenly I just became okay with that. And suddenly it was much nicer being around my family. It was like an expectation suddenly went. And when that expectation went, a more natural presence emerged and a more enjoyment. And it was like, oh yeah, I don't actually want to go deeper in this context. And so I started to get more intricate boundaries and see that it was not just me that didn't want, not just the people around me that didn't want to go deeper. I actually didn't want to go deeper under that context. And so, but the thing about realizing this in the moment is it actually brings this, I call it like a causal realignment. It's like you get realigned to like what's really like going on the deeper consciousness level. And that just brings an ease. And this is where boundaries, like you talked about loved ones earlier and close people, there's something about the transformational tension we create in the practice that's a choice. And like you say, you go on, with people who like circling, and it's not just, you can go deeper. Everyone's really wanting to go deeper and they're skillful at it. So you create this unbelievable transformational tension or this transformational laboratory or experience. And that's really what actually, this is the level thing that I was saying, or the value. Like you come together and you agree to like go into this transformational tension. And when you do that, something can really spark up, especially if both sides want it. But what I think you've got to be really careful of, if you do that a lot, is when you then go out of that environment, that you don't expect people to go into that agreement with them if you haven't made the agreement. And actually what some people might find is when they're trying to enroll people into kind of a deeper connection, they're actually subtly trying to get them to go into a transformational context with them without making it explicit. And so it's actually you that's crossing the boundary, not them that's withdrawing. But it's wonderful to see that, because there's an innocence to it. You want deep connection, and you've had that experience. Of course, you want it with people close to you. But actually, the higher level practice now is, how do you do that, like to be present and to really be yourself and to really see those around you as they are, when you haven't got that agreement and container there, and you've got a lot more shared experience and history, and that's actually the black belt practice then.
Yeah, I think when you were saying like you yourself being scared or of being vulnerable around. I think that's something that I'm noticing too. It's like when you come into a space where it's like we're conditioned for vulnerability, or it's like we've made this agreement, we're both going to be vulnerable. It's like, yeah, this is a nudist beach, everybody's gonna just come on here and be naked. It's easier than when it's like everybody's wearing clothes and it's like you have to bear everything. So I think I'm noticing that as well. So I think that's really true what you're saying. And yeah, it's
And
learned. Yeah, go
and
ahead.
that's an underestimated thing around boundaries as well. Like, everyone knows the more subtlety around, like, if I'm with you and I just start judging you and telling you what you should be doing in your experience, I'm totally crossing over a line. Like, that's your experience. How can I say I know what you need more? And how can I just bring that on you when you've not like indicated that that's what you want? So that will always be painful for people if you do that, if you make comments about their experience or judge them or give them advice when they're not ready. And we all kind of know that one, but the one that is less often seen is if I'm with you and I suddenly reveal a vulnerability or I start showing an emotion, I'm actually bringing you into my experience. So it's a bit like taking your clothes off, at someone's house, and you're like, hang on a second, I didn't want to see you naked. Like, you didn't give me a choice around this, actually. You've just suddenly just done it. And so that's where it's like, oh yeah, so there's actually a dance. Like, and like you said, we ourselves, we don't actually want to get naked if we actually don't feel like the people around us are really ready or able to honor our nakedness. And when we see that, there's something really relieving about it. And we can see the innocence of others and be okay if they're not wanting to make a transformational agreement with us. We know it's not for the faint-hearted anyway. We know it's not easy for ourselves to be in transformational tension. So if they're not choosing it, like, big love to them. But then when we have that longing for transformation, then we go to those that we know are willing to make that agreement. And I think when you do that, you start honoring people in this way, you start attracting it. And that's what I find now, that my close friends, we so live in that we don't even realize we're doing it. But then when I'm with my family, who it's not really a transformational container, I love it. I like actually having, relaxing from the transformational tension. And I'm still having my inquiries, but I just really appreciate them and like who they are, and just start to fall in love with small talk and, talking about football, or like, just being a normal family. But it's been a journey for me, I think, to kind of really genuinely appreciate that. It's been very meaningful.
Yeah, that sounds holistic. It sounds like a way to integrate it, these two different aspects. Yeah, this has been a fascinating exploration about circling, meditation, the darker developmental trauma dynamics, narcissism, borderline. We kind of explored a lot. Is there anything you wish that I would have asked you that I didn't, or is there anything else you would like to share before we wrap up?
My first instinct is it feels quite round, and there's so many topics I love talking about, and I love talking about like cross-paradigmatic practice, like we touched on meditation, embodiment, circling, developmental trauma. Like, I call it like mixed mystical arts, like how to mix those well. But maybe that's another discussion one day for us, because this feels quite round. Yeah. I think I've just got one vulnerability that I've kind of just dived in here with you, and I've just been sharing where I'm at, and I've not been thinking like, oh yeah, what would it be like for people that didn't know what circling is? I've just kind of let it all out. So it's a little bit vulnerable. That, oh, have I really shown like the simple part of what the practice is? But I think think that's more my vulnerability than.
Yeah, I think circling. I think a lot of people that are going to watch this are going to be already familiar with, and I've spoken about this practice. You know, I've had John on here. I've had Guy Singstock come on, and I like to say that circling is kind of like psychedelics. It's like, you know, you could talk about it, you could read about it, you could hear about it, you could even maybe see other people doing it, but until you're doing it yourself, you won't really know what it's like. So I encourage anybody who's hasn't tried circling and who's curious about it, to look into it. And, I do it a lot on relateful.com. Really appreciate it. And I love somebody that's already kind of deeper and wants to really learn how to facilitate and really go deeper into it. Circling Europe does amazing trainings. I was, blessed to do one of them, and I see you guys are constantly doing in person, and you're doing these other trainings around these complex dynamics, and so really appreciate it. There's a lot out there, and if you guys are interested, take advantage of it.
Yeah, and we got some really cool leaders that are just leading like free intro events and online courses that you can try out, and now you'll just learn more. This is why I need to own my vulnerability, because now I can say the thing that I hadn't said. And just learning how to be present while being with people in a more nuanced way, or learning how to speak in a way that you're not crossing over boundaries. You are just sharing your experience and inviting people in a gentle way, but also being able to see people where they are and not actually subtly try to influence them in a way that's going to actually create more disconnection. So we've got some really cool courses for that, for people that like to explore that.
Thanks a lot, Sean. Really appreciate you coming on here and having this conversation with me, and look forward to speaking again sometime soon.
Yeah, big love, Artem.
Much love, brother. Take care.
Bye now.